global hydrogen interview series, also known as the Full Court Press, where we take a rapid fire look at a market that some are now calling the new oil of the 21st century. My name is 𝗕𝗂𝗺𝗍𝗂. I'm the director of the Energy Transition Dialogues, and I'm glad to say that Michael Schacht, the CEO and co-founder of 𝗕𝘂𝗃𝗄 Commodities, is with us today. Michael, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for inviting me.
No, especially now with the COP very much underway and digital and ink headlines keeping everyone very busy. So it's great to have you here. And I know we're going to dive into quite a few different topics today as well. So we've got a good broad base of what's happening, and hopefully we can catch up after COP, because I suspect a lot of what we'll talk about now hopefully will evolve by the time January, February comes around as well.
Yeah, indeed. Let's kick it off.
Yes, indeed. So let's start on the shipping sector. It's trying to decarbonize. It is beginning to pick up pace. Like aviation, it's gone a lot of stick for being too slow. Some argue aviation has picked up the pace faster than the shipping sector. I think those who felt the financial pain of IMO 2020 and the disruption that came with that might not agree. And we're seeing all these different fuels start to emerge in the shipping sector, or ideas of different fuels. Obviously, when LNG came into the picture, it was kind of seen as the greenest fossil fuel, and is going to have a huge future in shipping, and that was the decision. Really, that was going to be the next step for a lot of stakeholders. And now we're seeing other fuels start to emerge with more seriousness. They've always been there, but with a lot more seriousness. And ammonia is certainly one of those. And one of the stats that we like to use is that if 30% of shipping switch to ammonia to use as a fuel, then the current production would have to nearly double. Now that brings us to the S word, scale, and that is just across everything related to the green energy transition. So from your point of view, what are some of the challenges for scaling up and decarbonizing production, and what is a very, very early journey?
Yeah, indeed, that's an interesting question. I mean, as you just mentioned, there are basically two perspectives. There's the supply and the demand perspective. And if we are kind of like looking on the demand, shipping sector might be one of them. I mean, next to others such as fertilizers, co-firing, etc. And I think the special thing about the shipping sector, that the investment cycles basically into new engines, into new vessels, are just they just need to be performed, and they just take more time. While let's say for other applications where you already use ammonia, such as fertilizers or chemical feedstock, you can basically just switch from gray ammonia to green if you would have some available. So I think this explains maybe the pace with which the shipping sector also reacted to the IMO 2020 regulation. So I mean, we kind of like also in the LNG world, as we've been going, I don't know, towards 2020, expected a lot of new FIDs on new LNG fueled vessels. I mean, some of them happened, but to be honest, like in my personal opinion, I expected even like basically like a greater switch to LNG as a shipping fuel. So I think, and indeed, this is kind of like the dilemma that ship owners are facing now. Also, when it's coming to basically the order book of new vessels, whether it makes sense to have like LNG as you just mentioned as the greenest fossil fuel as a bunker fuel, or make the transition directly towards green ammonia. So
and of course, or do they go for scrubbers versus LSFO? The menu is getting, and with that the pressure as well.
And I mean, I think as long as we have like a lot of kind of like regulatory uncertainty, particularly towards the future of LNG as a shipping fuel, I think there will be this decision, or this investment decisions are going to be postponed. So I mean, I think there will be certainly some new orders for LNG also in the next 10 to 20 years, but ammonia will certainly pick up. And I mean,
and when do you expect ammonia to pick up? Because like I mentioned in the beginning, it's such an early stage fuel for the shipping industry. I mean,
it's hard to say, because like if you kind of like look on the market dynamics, it's not like the ship owners would typically sign a long-term contract for ammonia supply with a hydrogen producer. but it's basically they're not the typical off-takers. So if there is a deep and liquid hydrogen and ammonia market, they can tap into that. But so I think maybe also to point back to the production perspective that you also, or supply perspective that you, and the scaling up issue, I think there we are still waiting for this scaled up big project, and their first like long-term contracts with, I mean, whether these are utilities or fertilizer producers, etc., need to be signed. And I think there have been a lot of kind of like pilot projects announced. But yeah, I mean, you ask for a number. I mean, I think there will be numerous FIDs in the next 5 years. And
those will be focused on the key ports: Rotterdam, Singapore, Fujairah, yes, and others. And you see, and are there any ports that you see making particular progress in this, in supporting their stakeholders for R&D?
I mean, I think indeed in Europe, Rotterdam and also Amsterdam have been kind of like leading in this field. So
Europe's leading in every field.
Yeah, so I mean that's the short answer.
Excellent. So if I asked you to cast your mind forward to say 2028, that sort of time, about 7 years to go, and maybe 6 if we're generous, as we're just on the cusp of 2022, what would you hope that ammonia market looks like for the bunkering industry? What would be your wish?
I mean, so as of today, kind of like the gray ammonia market is roughly 18 million tons per year, right? So it's a small part. I mean, compared to the LNG markets, it's a very a small market. So if I mean now it's I'm not sure how sensible it is to brainstorm about.
It's your wish, Michael. It can be anything you like.
about a certain number, but I think we need to have like at least, let's say, a depth of, I don't know, 5 to 10 MTPA to I mean have a liquid and a deep enough market that it can be traded, and so.
And that, I mean, that very much links to what I was going to ask you next in terms of the emergence of a traded hydrogen ammonia market and the pathway to getting there. It sounds just a case of regulation, investor confidence, scale, and then voila, we should be nearing that by 2030. How do you see the Middle East role in that? Obviously there's a huge amount of potential in the region for both blue and green hydrogen, and they're ambitious when it comes to energy markets, as we know, traditionally with fossil fuels and more recently with the renewable market. Do you see the Middle East being able to surge ahead and help get a hydrogen stroke ammonia bunkering, well, hydrogen or ammonia bunkering market established?
Yeah, I think they will play a crucial role, because I think in contrast to, let's say, if we compare this to the very early stage of LNG markets, like let's say in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there have been a lot of initiatives without signed long-term contracts. So, for instance, like I mean, in Saudi Arabia, the projects, and I mean, I'm not sure about the output number yearly, but I think it is quite substantial. That they more or less decided to move forward with without having any long-term contract signed. And so, but I think, for instance, like what has been happening so far, I mean, as you probably know, these were rather like showcases or pilot projects, like the shipments from the UAE to Japan of blue ammonia. They were like just several tons, like not thousands of tons.
And these are Saudi Arabia's first shipment last year to Japan, I believe was last September, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But I think UAE actually also says shipments.
But I think Saudi was the first, as you know, being the excellent marketer that it is.
So I mean, I think if we kind of like move forward on a large scale globally, then I think some of the patterns that we've seen, again, I make the comparison to early LNG markets, will also emerge. So basically, to get projects financed, you need to have like a majority of the output pre-sold, like through long-term contracts. So And I think so far there have been like, I mean, a lot of political announcements, but I haven't seen any Japanese utility or elsewhere being ready to sign like a long-term contract for, I don't know, 2 million tons per year. So I think, I mean, this can be like a lack of regulation still, or government support, but I think we'll get there. So I think, like for instance, also in Germany, there have been quite advanced conversations actually between like large German utilities and blue hydrogen producers about also like seaborne shipped hydrogen exports. And yeah, I mean, I think in the next 2-3 years we'll see some first contracts of this sort.
So in the next 2 to 3, so by 2025, you'd expect to see a first contract between Germany and Middle East based on hydrogen exports.
I mean, this wasn't Middle East, this was Russia, but
Russia. Okay. But they are talking to Middle East as well, Germany. They've been talking to Saudi Arabia and about trying to tie up as well, haven't they?
I mean, that may be. I just like had in mind that 𝗬𝗔𝗿𝗴 recently published like a press release that they've been progressing with Novatek on on potential hydrogen supplies.
Absolutely, they're shooting ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe it will even happen earlier. Let's see.
And we're talking, you know, obviously all these changes in the broader market are then changing how companies have to think about their business plan and urgently, dramatically scribbling away new goals, new strategies, new partnerships as well, perhaps they wouldn't have been thinking of before. And this also includes assets and shedding assets that perhaps don't support their decarbonisation goals. We're seeing this especially with tier 1 companies, and giving those assets to SMEs or medium-sized companies. What do you think about that? Do you think that there's a risk with that, in that the tier 1 companies end up being more, you know, effective in their decarbonisation? They do arguably have a harder job with their global supply chains and so on, especially with Scope 3. But then they also have the greater spotlight on them, whereas SMEs and the smaller energy companies that they may be buying these assets don't have that level of scrutiny, and this could backfire later on in the 2020s when it comes to overall decarbonisation efforts. What do you think about that?
So I mean, I think in the at least in Europe, the trend has been in the last 10 years to kind of like this creation of bad banks for like the carbon heavy assets. And then, I mean, they've been going back and forth, particularly like in the German company landscape. But I'm not sure exactly if I 100% understand your question. So do you mean that kind of like big like portfolio players outsource their renewable entities or their innovation entities to smaller companies, or
more that big portfolio players are, and we're seeing selling off, you know, pipeline assets, selling off with, you know, and doing so, and that supports their, you know, it starts to get around that fear of stranded assets later on, but also it's getting rid of assets perhaps have a higher carbon footprint and selling them further down the chain. But then those companies further down the chain don't have the same level at the moment of environmental scrutiny on them. Like we saw with Shell and The Hague, you know, they don't have a lot of wiggle room, these tier 1 companies. They're under intense scrutiny. And then so these smaller to medium-sized companies take on these assets, but they don't have the same scrutiny. They don't have the same budgets perhaps to be able to decarbonize those assets as well. So as the decade rolls on, when you look at the industry as a whole, it looks like, oh, fantastic, the tier 1s have done X, Y, Z. But actually, if you look a bit deeper, a lot of that carbon footprints hasn't been properly addressed.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly a big risk, and it's also a big risk for governments, depending on how, let's say, the legal accountability for these assets end up with. And I mean, sorry to come back to Germany the whole time, but basically, I mean, here, for instance, we've seen that the government basically, when the coal exit was performed, and also some companies push their coal assets to bad banks. that basically they had to sign liabilities basically being liable for these assets in the end. So I think that that's certainly probably a sensible thing to do from the government's perspective. Yeah.
And with the, you mentioned then accountability only comes, we only know what we know, really, and that comes through proper measuring and mitigation. And we started this by talking about, relatively new markets. Hydrogen itself isn't new, but the development of the green market, 𝗕𝗂𝗺𝗺𝗫 is new, and same with ammonia. What level of importance do you place these markets having roadmaps, or countries having roadmaps to give indications? So Cranmore Partners and Energy Institute recently launched a hydrogen investability index, giving visibility, helping investors go, right, these are the top 30 countries for that are great to invest in hydrogen, in the context of it being very new, and strong manufacturing industries, or strong need, or strong regulatory environment, and so on, and graded them. How important do you think that level of visibility is to the market? Because we're seeing, as you just touched on, there's so much change going on. How vital is that?
I mean, I think the economics do underpin the kind of like emergence of a scaled up market in the end. So in the end, I mean, I don't know if Aramco can offer a price that then it's just like would persuade potential off-takers. Then I think it's not so much about regulations and the roadmaps. On the other side, obviously, the whole regulatory issue significantly impacts the demand, and also the future of carbon pricing, etc. I mean, these will be kind of like the points of freedom or the degrees of freedom, how the degrees of freedom will be regulated. So
indeed,
yeah.
I like that, degrees of freedom. That's brilliant. And I mean, what role do you see digital tools playing in this, especially AI, and just the general innovation under the umbrella of the fourth industrial revolution? How big a role does it still have to play in helping identify metrics, and then from metrics helping achieve roadmaps?
I think, I mean, even taking a step back from hydrogen to, let's say, the classic oil and gas industry, there is an astonishingly, let's say, partly, not everywhere, but partly an astonishingly low level of digitalization and optimization. So, I mean, we've been so basically as 𝗕𝗂𝗺𝗫 Commodities, we are developing AI-based software solutions for portfolio and for shipping optimization. So basically for trading and shipping desks at oil and gas companies. And I mean, we've been started to talk to people in the last 12 months or so. I mean, the majority or a substantial share of the companies that we talk to still do their annual delivery programs for instance, for their vessels with Excel, and basically based on industry experience. And I think there are, I mean, we can talk about, let's say, the last bit of decarbonization let's say, steps that are further out on the to-do list, especially when it comes to hydrogen and ammonia. But I think even before that, if we address flaring properly, if we address just like the optimization potentials that we have within the oil and gas industry as it is right now, there is already like a big step or a big share of carbon reductions that can be achieved there. So
why do you think this isn't happening? Because it's something we've been talking about very proactively actively rather, for 5 years. We certainly have at Gulf Intelligence 5-7 years, and it's part of every single conversation, and everybody else is talking about all the big oil. Everyone's talking about digitalization and digitization and the importance of them, but the application just still doesn't seem to be near where it could be. And you would think with turbulent oil prices, with the pressure coming from environmental agendas, you would think that much more is being invested in this space.
Well, I mean, I think so. I mean, firstly, so we've been rather focused on, let's say, clients in the LNG sector. So I can't speak too much about what's been happening in the
energy,
oil markets.
Yeah, energy.
But like, if we take the example of LNG, then I mean, there are just like very static processes, how kind of like certain supply chains work, and really I don't know, like the people aren't that motivated to try new things. And I think kind of like the value proposition always I mean needs to be, or like what works best is just like if through like monetary savings. I mean emission savings come along with it, but I think this still is kind of like the point where the people start to listen up. Yeah, so I think there is still, but also, for instance, I mean that there has been some advances. So especially like in, for instance, if we think about like a satellite imaging and the kind of like yeah, technical progress that was achieved in the last years through kind of like analyzing this images with AI and other technologies. A lot of yeah, kind of like progress was achieved, for instance, in the monitoring of flaring, and also basically yeah, providing some accountability for that. So I think this this is substantially like, yeah, that's a good thing.
And I think as well, maybe the growing confidence, or the the growing application of digital is what's helping these big decisions at COP being made, such as ending goals to end deforestation and cutting methane from the global methane emission levels by 30% by 2030, I believe. And I don't think those goals would be even attempted if we didn't have the digital tools to help spur that and help account for it, and the real-time value of those. So on that topic, if we're looking over up to 2025, which somehow is only just 3 years away, what would you say are the key technologies that would be focused on? Again, if you had your wish list, whatever Michael wants by 2025, what would be the key technologies that you would want to see developed to support the energy transition, not just for the more conventional markets in the fossil fuels, but also for the really truly emerging markets such as ammonia and green hydrogen?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe to start off with the last bit of your question, I think if we're talking about like the hydrogen market or ammonia market, there are a lot of like technologies or innovations on the technical side, so on the physical side of things. And so, for instance, like I've been quite interested in the development of liquid organic hydrogen carriers as potential as a potential alternative, and but also a competitive alternative to ammonia. I think there have been yeah, a lot of developments also, like a lot of developments are still out there. So I mean that would be one. Certainly, generally, let's say in potential innovations in let's say hydrogen production, scaling costs down, etc. But I can't pin this to like a certain technology. Then if we talk about like, let's say the digital space, I think indeed, I mean, AI is a very broad clause. So what we kind of like, for us, it's rather the methods that we apply that basically are defining this AI. I think here, if we're talking, let's say, about AI in the context of optimization, there are indeed a lot of powerful tools that can be built with that, that just can significantly increase the added value, and also on the other side the decrease emissivity in different applications. And I mean, just like to give you, like, for instance, an example about like portfolio optimization. So like imagine you have like a contract portfolio with a lot of long and short positions. So just like, for instance, you have like 3 longs, one where you need to pick a cargo like in a certain port, one where you have a cargo delivered by a third party, and then you have like your final clients. And then basically the question is which cargo goes where, which ships fulfills which contract, etc. But now, if you imagine this in a sequence of trades that is just like not one trade, but like, I don't know, maybe 10,000 trades over the course of the year, and all are interlinked, and you have changing variables and dynamic pricing, etc. This isn't an environment that you can I mean, that can technically be solved by Excel or like by let's say experience of traders. So I think if and I mean, in the end, this increases or decreases the idle times of the vessel. So and finally also the emissions. So.
And surely by increasing that cost effectiveness as well, it gives stakeholders in the whole chain a little bit more breathing space to be able to do R&D into new fuel types such as ammonia, such as scaling up LNG, and so on. So it just adds a little, you know, that level of efficiency brought by the AI and the broader toolbox that you're talking about just adds that breathing space that I think the industry very much seems to need.
Yeah, I agree.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael. We'll end on that note. I agree, is always a great note to end on. Thank you very much, and I hope you can join us again soon, because after COP it'll be very interesting to see how ammonia and the momentum behind that has developed. I think it'll be sentiment, but still be interesting to see how that develops, how that feeds into the shipping industry, how the digital tools that we've discussed have developed, and very importantly, how your AI efforts are going and how that's rolling out. So I hope you can join us again, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was lovely to be here, and yeah, I hope to see you again soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks. Bye.